Hi, everyone. Welcome to Summer EBT, Reflections on the First Summer of Implementation and Looking Towards the Future, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Communications Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click the CC button in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time during the presentation, please use the Q&A panel. With that, I'll pass it off to Kelsey Boone, Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst at FRAC. Take it away, Kelsey.
Thanks so much, Steve. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited about our list of panelists today to talk about Summer EBT and the implementation, as well as looking towards the future. Next slide. Just want to go over a brief agenda. We're going to start with Laura Kriebel, Food and Energy Assistance Division Operation Manager from the Colorado Department of Human Services. And then we will turn it over to Katie Parch, the Director of USDA Child Nutrition Education Programs from the Nebraska Department of Education. And we will finish up with Jessica Rutstein from the Food Share Program and Policy Analyst for the Wisconsin Department of Services. And then we'll finish up with a question and answer session. So please put all of your questions in the Q&A function. Oh, so I will hand it over to Laura Kriebel.
Awesome. I saw in the chat there was a little confusion if the slides were showing or not. So I was also kind of waiting to see if folks can see them now. So hi, everyone. Laura Kriebel, Colorado Department of Human Services. And we can go to our next slide. So some of the things that we felt helped contribute to Colorado's successful launch of a program was that our state legislation was signed very early. We were incredibly lucky. There was a special session at the end of 2023, and we were able to get authorization to operate the program as well as the state matching funds very early on. And that was really what we identify as a major key to success in this program for the first year, because we were able to begin our procurement work earlier, and we were able to encumber the necessary funds with vendors. We were also really lucky to be able to partner with the leadership and get a procurement exemption for some of our state procurement rules in this first year. Colorado was very invested in making sure that children could get access to this benefit during the summer. And we identified some of our internal procurement processes as potentially being hampering to being able to get the benefit out the door quickly. So we were very pleased to be able to get that in our legislation. Additionally, as I'm sure all states that operate at pandemic EBT and are now operating summer EBT, we were able to lean on some of the supports that were still in place from pandemic EBT. In Colorado, we had an existing call center contract. Because of the seasonal nature of the program, it is very helpful to be able to scale up and scale down the services to meet the family's needs at the times when they need the most support. So we do outsource our call center through a contract, and we were able to extend from what we had in PEBT, which was incredibly helpful. And additionally, just all the lessons learned from PEBT, and some of that's even just down to like helpful trackers and things like that that we created over the years of administering PEBT that we were able to repurpose so that we could start hitting the ground running with summer EBT. Additionally, we had a strong partnership with the Colorado Department of Education, who is our partner in talking with the schools and districts who are that frontline support to the families who have students participating in free and reduced price lunch and are then eligible for summer EBT. We have strong dedication and hard work of staff on all sides in multiple state agencies and partners across the state who are just very dedicated to getting this program out to children. And then also the strong vendor relationships that we had built through other programs that we administer, and then also through pandemic EBT, being able to lean on those and have them also come in understanding some of the public assistance program challenges, and also having them have been familiar with some of the challenges with pandemic EBT were really some large keys to our success, we feel. Next slide. And then, of course, communication, and more communication. So we had outreach plans, we had resources for districts, schools, partners, counties. We made toolkits, we had QR codes for flyers. We'd create custom QR codes on request if somebody was needing to do something a little more targeted and take them to a really specific spot on our website. We had a banner that's live on our website where we were updating folks regularly so that they could see the status of where the program was and what to expect next. We had our call center, we set up new email boxes. Colorado has a lot of very rural school districts, so we contracted with our Family Resource Center Association to work with family resource centers across the state to help get some support out into those more rural areas where families might not be able to as easily access like a county office with their questions and everything. But primarily we have been trying to drive traffic back to our website and our call center, because those are things that with a simple phone or internet connection, you can reach us from anywhere. So we really did try to make it as accessible to folks as possible. We had media contact, webinars, meetings, and all the emails. So communication was just a huge piece of the Colorado plan for how we were going to get this out. But we felt it was incredibly important to make sure that everybody was as educated as they could be on the nuances and differences so that they could understand like who is going to be eligible, when are we going to get our benefits, how does this work? And that's always a challenge with any program, but especially so a new program, and especially on such a tight runway to launch. But we're pretty proud that we got the word out there pretty decently. Next slide. But with these came some challenges. So one of the main challenges that we faced is we actually had a higher number of eligible students than initially anticipated. We estimated that there were probably about 380,000 students in Colorado, but we actually wound up issuing to over 500,000 students in Colorado. When we initially did estimates for a pandemic EBT, we thought that there could be a caseload similar to this, but the pandemic EBT numbers just never quite realized the same number that we issued to in this first year of summer EBT. And so we really think that that also points to a pretty successful push of information to get families enrolled and knowing about this new program. One of the challenges, though, of having such a larger enrollment than we initially anticipated, in Colorado, we did choose to issue a new card for each student. So with this increase in eligible students, that led to card stock shortages, and so a change to the benefit issuance date from our initial timeline, and some additional things that were going on at the same time. We were actually renegotiating the entire contract with our EBT vendor for our main large EBT contract at the time that we were trying to launch this program and get it out the door. So that kind of complicated our contracting process when we needed to add extra funds to support the increased caseload. But luckily we'll be on that new contract next year, and so we don't anticipate that being as challenging in the future. And then, of course, the extra communications around the change to the benefit issuance date, both internal and external, and getting all the necessary approvals in place. That was definitely a challenge that we had to work through as a state. Next slide. Another challenge, and I know that on all the webinars I've been on, this is not a unique challenge to any of us, is the data collection, deduplication, and then changes to the data as well. So some of the challenges that Colorado faced around our data is that our school districts are mostly on summer break by Memorial Day, which makes the window for data collection in the spring very tight. Luckily, we were able to utilize a waiver this year, so we actually wound up issuing our benefits in July as opposed to early May. But in future program years, to be in line with that, with the requirements, we will have to be figuring out ways to get those benefits out the door in early May, which is challenging because of school districts having their spring breaks and also other data collections going on. Additionally, some of the collection periods for summer EBT overlap with other data collections, especially near the end of our summer operational period. In Colorado, we have something called the October count, where the schools are all giving us their information from back to school. And it's a pretty heavy administrative burden. And it also kind of clashes a little bit with our corrections period for summer EBT. So we've been looking at our school calendars and trying to think about ways that we can better align the dates and still meet the program requirements, but figuring out ways that we can select a summer operational period date that is in more harmony with when the data collections for schools are able to happen and when other data collections are happening as well. Another thing we saw is that many rural districts and schools have minimal staff during summer months, which creates a compressed timeline for families to submit their data to schools and to process the corrections at the end of the summer, because a lot of our kiddos go out for summer break, and then when they come back in, that's the district coming back into. So it's a very small timeline for some families to hand in any corrections that might need to happen to make sure they got their benefits for this year. Additionally, and I know this is something we all face, is families might use different names on their school forms for NSLP than with other assistance programs, such as the SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid. So that was something we saw a lot of. Sometimes there was a space, sometimes there was a hyphen, sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes it was just one of two last names. Sometimes it was a nickname as a first name. So that's been a challenge that we, along with, I know everybody else on this call, have been trying to work through. And we are working with our tech vendors to try to figure out some interesting ways that we could do some more fuzzy data matching criteria to kind of better deduplicate some of that in the future as well. And then additionally, families may move or have other changes to their information between when data is collected and when they receive benefits. And this is a little bit challenging in this first year because Colorado did collect data from the schools for free and reduced price lunch for that categorical eligibility. And then we also have our SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid. But those data sets are not the newest. They're not real time. And so if somebody has moved and changed their address, and then if their district is closed, what we saw were a lot of folks calling in to get their addresses updated, to get their cards reissued. So something that we are looking at is a way that maybe families can more easily automatically update their address with us in a more kind of ongoing case management way for summer EBT in the future. Next slide. And then that kind of ties into the challenges of how to support families during the summer months. So like I was saying, many of these rural districts have minimal staff or even entirely closed during the summer. So families don't have a place where they can change their address. They don't have a place where they can go ask questions. So we really have tried to set up supports with our website and our call center and family resource centers and as many avenues as we can to help support families, but we're definitely very interested in looking into technological solutions in the future now that we have a little bit more time and more of a runway to put some of that stuff in place so that families can also do a little bit of self-serve with some of the things related to the program. Additionally, summer EBT is new. So obviously folks are familiar with pandemic EBT in our state. But it's a little different. I mean, as we all know, the criteria for it are slightly different, and that nuance is sometimes a little challenging to communicate with families. So just trying to make sure that we had robust facts and toolkits and just trying to get the words out there any way that we could. And then also just talking one-on-one with folks too when they call in to explain their benefits, the program, and the eligibility. Another thing that we saw is Colorado has healthy school meals for all, which is amazing because that means all students can get meals at their school. But it did lead to some confusion with families about summer EBT eligibility because a lot of the messaging around EBT kind of nationwide has been if your child is receiving free meals at school, they're probably eligible. In Colorado, that's not necessarily the case because all of our kids have access to this healthy school meals for all. So trying to help work with the schools and message that and make sure that people understand the difference between healthy school meals for all and national school lunch program and free and reduced price lunch, the nuances between those two and kind of what creates those criteria for eligibility for a child for summer EBT. Additionally, because of Healthy School Meals for All, for a little bit there, Colorado had seen a slight drop off in the National School Lunch Program participation for free and reduced price lunch in schools, because kids could just come in and get their meals, and it didn't require families to apply. So we partnered with CDE, and CDE did a fantastic job doing a huge information push to schools and districts to really encourage families to get those forms in and see if they are eligible so that their children could receive summer EBT. An additional thing for Colorado is we are one of the, I believe it's 10 state supervised county administered models for a majority of our public assistance programs. But summer EBT is a little different in our state in that it is directly administered by us. So that's been a little different because a lot of folks in Colorado are very used to being able to walk into a county office and it has absolutely all the information about all the programs you could ever need. And while we still did do training with counties and give them resources to give to folks, the county workers are not the frontline ones administering this program in our state. It's administered at the state level. So that's something that we did have to work through as a little bit of a challenge to make sure that folks were coming to the right places and getting the support they need. We actually have a dedicated extra line on our phone line for county workers to call into too. So if they do have somebody who has walked in and needs extra support for this program, they are able to call into that county support line on our phone line and get help pretty immediately for the person who's in person with them. Next slide. So all these challenges and just lessons learned kind of lead us to the road ahead and how are we going to enhance our program in future years. Some of the things that we are looking at and have already been doing in some cases, so like the first one, instructing families to hold on to their cards year to year. We feel like that is going to be huge for trying to get those benefits out the door in early May when we first start our summer operational period, because then we can just load benefits onto a card that folks already have in hand, and that is a million times easier than trying to get brand new cards printed and pushed. That was definitely a challenge in this first year to get everybody's cards printed and mailed to the right places. So for families that may be eligible year to year, holding on to those cards in a safe place where we can reissue benefits to them will be really, I think, key to us helping get things out the door quickly. Like I mentioned before, additionally, we're looking into ways to find solutions for how families can update their address and other information with us more dynamically and directly with us, because we rely very, very heavily on those CDE school files, but they are a point in time. So finding a way to have both that database of who has been eligible for summer EBT, but then more real-time kind of case management updates to that folks can initiate themselves, I think will be a real key to continued success in this program, so that folks can actually know that their cards are going to go to the right places, their notices are going to the right places. And that would also be nice too, to be able to take some of the extra step of schools having to report all that to us, and to have that real-time data would be incredibly helpful. So I think that's something we're working on, but I don't think that's unique by any means. I think this is something most states are probably exploring in different ways, and some may have even already successfully implemented. Another thing that we're doing, like I mentioned, is expanding that data matching criteria and doing more fuzzy matching. An additional thing that we saw this year that was interesting to us was addresses over 30 characters with folks writing out Avenue instead of AVE. And that created some interesting, I guess there are limitations within our EBT vendor for how many characters you can have in an address. So that led to some cleanup on our end. So we are trying to explore ways that can be a little easier for the address fields as well. Additionally, as everyone knows, this program doesn't really require social security number, so that makes matching a little challenging sometimes. We do have a state assigned student ID number that we would like students to use more, but we found in pandemic EBT, families and students don't necessarily know this number. And with the tight runway to launch in this first program year, we did not require that they have their SACID number. However, for future years, we are exploring what it would look like to make sure that families know this number and have this number, because being able to match a student one-to-one with their SACID would be incredibly beneficial. And I think it would also help us with our efforts to create some way that parents can report changes to us, because that SACID is such a unique identifier number for a child. Additionally, we're going to be doing a plain language review of our notices for this next year, just to make sure that everything is clear and good when it goes out again next year and the program kind of settles into more permanency. And then additionally, CDHS has a really cool group as part of it called the Family Voice Council. And these are groups of people that are real participants of our programs, and we compensate them for their time for feedback. So we're going to be engaging with our Family Voice Council to try to gather that feedback directly from families so that we can continue to improve the program. And next slide. I think that is everything. So thank you so much for the time, and I will pass it back to Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Laura, and apologies for the number ones as opposed to the numbering. Apparently, when you download slides, it changes all the numbering. So apologies for that, but I will now turn it over to Katie Parch from Nebraska.
Thank you very much. As Kelsey noted, I'm Katie Parch. I'm the Director of the Child Nutrition Programs in the Office of Coordinated Student Support Services, where our team provides all of the non-academic support to students enrolled in schools. And I have a different perspective or a different angle on Summer EBT implementation. As you just heard from an agency that issued cards, we were the agency more primarily responsible for vetting and verifying student information and for communicating with schools, as we have strong relationships with those public and non-public schools across Nebraska. You can go to the next slide, Kelsey. So I know we all, or most of us probably know the ways that students were determined eligible for the program. I've listed them here and tried to differentiate those types of students that were eligible because of information that our SNAP agency in Nebraska, which is the Department of Health and Human Services, or DHHS, has information for, versus what the NDE, the Nebraska Department of Education, was responsible for. So students participating in SNAP, the forms of Medicaid that also derive free and reduced meal eligibility, as well as TANF records, resided in that agency. And the determining factor for those children was that they were compulsory school age. So DHHS was responsible for identifying and setting business rules to identify those students. On the other hand, the NDE played a really important role, again, because of our ability to communicate with and our relationships with school staff. The students who received FDPIR were identified as homeless, migrant, runaway, or foster, because our assumption was, in most cases, that schools probably had the most accurate or most current information, especially about how to deliver a card to the household of an eligible student. So we did request schools provide that information for the students enrolled in their school buildings. And as in addition, all the other students otherwise eligible for free or reduced price meals meant they were also eligible to receive Summer EBT. And that information was again provided to us by the student school. We also were responsible for identifying students or households that applied to receive the benefit for their school-aged children enrolled in schools that participated in the National School Lunch Program through the Summer EBT application. You can head to the next slide. So some challenges, of course, came up with the data elements and collecting that information. Our timeline of implementation in Nebraska was relatively short. The decision to participate in Summer EBT came in mid to late February for Nebraska, and our implementation deadline, really to get things going and have a system that was set up and usable, was obviously coming quickly, only 3 months later in May of 2024. So we had to quickly move to communicate this new program, explain to school staff that this is different than pandemic EBT, that had no bearing on school absence related to COVID. And that was a really interesting and difficult sort of thing to communicate clearly and to everyone who needed to know that information. After 3 years of pandemic EBT, folks in schools heard EBT and immediately thought, oh, this depends on COVID-related absences. And we didn't have any of those. Therefore, my school doesn't have data to provide, which of course was incorrect. So we worked repeatedly to communicate with schools through as many different people and positions as we could. In the school nutrition program, we have connections with food service directors and claim contact keeper type positions. The data side of our agency has a really important role in student data, of course, but they have their own separate connections with data steward type positions. So we needed to leverage communication through all available channels, and we tried our best to do that. So we required some basic data elements to be submitted to us for those students who DHHS did not have records for, right? The students who did not already receive SNAP or the types of Medicaid that also identify students as eligible for receiving free or reduced price meals. We needed schools to tell us the first and last name of both the student as well as the parent or guardian in that household. We needed them to provide the date of birth for the student. This was essential for them activating the card upon receipt. We also, of course, needed a correct mailing address as well as an NDE or like state level education ID that is assigned to a student when they enter the Nebraska school system and follows them wherever they go. That was an essential part of our data validation process. In order to uphold and protect integrity of the program, we needed to make sure that students reported in a school file for issuance of summer EBT benefits were in fact enrolled in a Nebraska school that participated in the National School Lunch Program. So in order to help provide support to getting the correct data, we of course provided a template organized in the way that we preferred to receive the information. Of course, many challenges came up in collecting information. Schools sometimes didn't use the approved template we provided, which meant we had to spend a lot of man hours or human hours cleaning up data, making corrections to data, reaching out to schools to ask them about data they submitted that we just didn't feel confident we could correct ourselves. We also tried to be very clear about the instructions for which types of students to include. And in Nebraska, the community eligibility provision has been adopted by more and more districts in the last few years. And CEP participation at a building or district level does not derive summer EBT eligibility for individual students. But again, this difference between pandemic EBT for CEP enrolled students was not the same as that guidance or requirement is for students enrolled at a CEP school in terms of their eligibility for summer EBT. So there was a lot of like recommunicating, clarifying with school data stewards and school principals and superintendents about the differences here, and that they still needed to try to find someone at their school who could compile and submit the data to us in order to help support our issuance of cards to all eligible students in households who wanted to receive the benefit. We required that student data files be uploaded into the secure portal accessible by those school data stewards, helping ensure that there wouldn't be possible duplication of data. It also helped ensure that we were receiving data from school stewards assigned to a specific school, hoping that that meant that we could account for all of the schools that participate in the National School Lunch Program, and we're better able to keep track of schools we needed to follow up with because they hadn't yet submitted data. Next slide, please. Email communication to schools as well as 2 webinars were the primary means we used to communicate with schools. And again, we tried to use people we were familiar with communicating with. Over the course of a school year, we send a lot of communication to schools, both in newsletter and email format. It's very common for us to host webinars, both formal and informal. So we tried to leverage the typical communication channels we use with schools in a way to explain what was needed from them in order for us to carry out summer EBT. So again, explaining the basics of the program, what kinds of students are eligible and what we needed to receive from schools was the focus of those. We also shifted to be able to use schools as our primary communication channel through which we could reach households. With any new program, I think it's important for us to provide information from sources or places that households, parents, guardians, students already know and trust. And the most obvious and probably logical option for that in Nebraska was to just leverage schools as our source to do that and encourage them to use their typical or traditional communication channels through which to provide some summer EBT information. So we made the templates. We developed the resources, the newsletter blurbs, the social media posts, and then encourage schools to try to utilize their usual methods, implementing the templates and examples we provided in hopes that we could educate the public on what summer EBT was, who was eligible, and approximately when they would receive their benefit card. And of course, we provided information about the program on the websites for both of the agencies involved. We provided some basic information. We tried to update and compile frequently asked questions as they were received. And then additionally, we provided a link to the summer EBT application to help folks apply for the program if they were not previously eligible but thought they might be. Next slide. So that communication to households, like I mentioned, we utilize schools as our primary source for that. The DHHS also utilized a text message campaign that coordinated with our timing of issuances. The messages behind those obviously would be basic things like you would expect to receive a card around this time because these are our issuance dates. They provided ideas and support for making healthy food choices with the funds available on the summer EBT cards, including low cost and healthy meal ideas. We linked to or provided information about how to locate approved EBT vendors and provided information about customer service resources available to households who would receive a card. We're also the fortunate recipient of support from an organization in Nebraska called Nebraska Appleseed, which has a division committed to supporting food security, especially for students and children. They were a great partner in providing program information and in pointing Nebraska residents to those important information and resources to receive that information as well. Next slide. Another challenge we've faced in Nebraska was validating data used to issue cards in a way that not in a way that made us question the integrity or that we were not carrying out the program in the way that it was intended. The challenge we faced was in some of the time needed to be spent on validating data and cleaning up data. So DHHS's SNAP and Medicaid students were basically pulled out those participants who didn't meet the date of birth requirement. And our biggest batch of card issuance happened in our first issuance in late May at the beginning of summer break. So we're really proud of that. Of course, we want the card benefits to be used when school's not in session and students don't have access to meals through their school. So that was a wonderful success, I think. But ongoing over the course of the summer, as we were working through validating data, we of course encountered some challenges, and some of it was with data that just wasn't as clean as we thought it would be when we'd gone into the program and made our plan, our implementation plan. So we have some work to do as far as making that data be a bit cleaner and not require as much human time spent in cleaning up the data. Ideas for automating and connecting data sources to help support that are priorities for us for 2025. The NDE's role was to validate all other types of students, those non-SNAP and non-Medicaid students, because again, we were the recipient agency of the data provided by the school or data that was populated in a summer EBT application. For those, we would ensure that all of those income qualified students were enrolled in a school participating in the National School Lunch Program. And at the NDE, we retain student enrollment data in public and non-public schools in a system we call Advisor, where we can connect a student first and last name, date of birth, and NDE ID that's reported in a school summer EBT data upload to what we have reported for that student for any given school year, also by their school. So we're trying to match that information as a check to make sure we're issuing cards to students who truly were enrolled in a participating school. It was also our job to finalize a data file with the most recently known mailing address, and then that file would get securely shared with DHHS, then to FIS, the card vendor, and issued that way. Next slide, please. So customer service was a high priority for both of the agencies, though we know we have a lot of room to grow. There certainly were challenges with standing up a brand new program on a very short timeline. Among the biggest challenges was the rolling issuance of benefit cards. We issued about 190,000 students benefits over the course of 4 different issuances. And for students or households with students who are waiting until our final issuances in August or September, we know that they had lots of questions about where their card was, when they would receive their card, to what address it was actually mailed. So as Colorado mentioned, the need for a place for customers to go to check on the status of their card is essential. We agree with that in Nebraska and would love to develop something like that where it's more of a self-service customer portal if possible. We also had access to, the DHHS call center rather had access to benefit issuance files. However, we're only giving them access to files of eligible students after those cards had begun to be mailed. So students in the later issuances, like I said, in August or September, the call center staff didn't have any reliable information to use to answer questions. So we're looking to make improvements in the timeliness of when we may identify eligible students and how we can provide that information to call center staff so that the public in Nebraska feels like they can get answers and have information and can be informed. We'd also love to implement a process to request address changes. We know that some people move more frequently than others, and we want to make sure these folks have access to the benefits on their card as quickly as possible. So we have work to do in that area as well. We'd also like to make it much more clear, an explanation on card issuance and the timeline based on how a student qualifies to receive Summer EBT. The call center also did a great job in supporting card activation. There were many questions about that, and they did have access to enough information to provide that support. So someone who had card in hand had tried to access it but couldn't. The call center was a wonderful help there, and I'm not sure we have a lot of room to grow in that area because that was handled very well. At NDE, we've got a 2-3-person team of school nutrition program staff that processed Summer EBT applications. We received about 1,200 of those, and around 900 of them were students who had already been issued benefits or were planned to have been issued benefits. But again, the long timeline of benefit issuance left kids who were in one of the later issuances wondering, or their parents wondering, where is my card? I guess I'll just apply for Summer EBT using the online application, hoping that one way or another, I'll receive the card to help me buy groceries. So if we can speed up the issuance timeline, people will get their cards in a more timely manner, of course. We won't have as many people completing the Summer EBT application. As I mentioned, we received about 1,200 of them complete. 900 of those were issued a benefit in another way, data provided from a school, or they were SNAP or Medicaid recipients. You can head to the next slide. So again, some future improvements we'd like to make. We know communication and customer service are top priorities. We know cleaning up some of the data in a more efficient manner is also at the top of the list because that's going to help us provide issuances faster and sooner after we identify eligible students. We'd love to develop a system that retains a history of all the data changes that so it can be accessible by both agencies. That supports the customer service component of this program. Like I mentioned, we want to improve that timeline for benefit issuance and speed it up. We want kids and families to have access to the funds on those cards for as much of the covered summer period when they're not in school as we can. We know how important it is with the new program to provide regular communication. That is our goal for the duration of school year 24-25 in preparation for summer 2025 SEBT. So that regular communication with data stewards and other school staff to help prepare them for the request of their time to provide data is going to be essential. We'd love to have a Summer EBT application that's got some enhanced data validation components in it, not only for a better customer experience when it comes to completing the application, but also for an easier and more efficient experience internally when it comes to processing those applications and identifying students eligible through that method. And finally, communication to or for households, I think, is essential, and leveraging our relationship and communication channels through schools is going to help us explain to families how and where they could update a mailing address in order to receive the card the first time it's mailed out, including a timeline for card issuance based on qualification method. These are the things that we struggled with the most this year, and these are the things we think we can reasonably address through some communication improvements for 2025.
Thank you so much, Katie. Steve, if we could go 2 slides. We will answer questions at the end. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it now to Jess.
Thanks, Kelsey. My name is Jess Rutstein, and I work for the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, which is our state's SNAP agency. Next slide. I'm going to get us started by sharing a bit about how things in Wisconsin look and work. Next slide. So to start, Wisconsin operated the pandemic EBT program beginning with the 2020-2021 school year and continued to do so through the summer of 2023. We then, of course, took on the new challenge of standing up a summer EBT program this summer. For both the pandemic EBT and now the summer EBT programs, the Department of Health Services, or DHS, has served as the lead agency, while the Department of Public Instruction, DPI, has served as our partner agency. Wisconsin is a locally controlled state, meaning that decisions and processes related to student data collection are not driven from the top down, but are instead determined individually from school district to school district. And finally, important to know, there are additional challenges that come from the fact that Wisconsin operates on a biennial state budget cycle, which means we can only make requests for additional funding from our legislature once every 2 years. Next slide. So we began issuing summer EBT benefits on June 22nd to all children who were known to be eligible at the time, whether that be via streamline certification or via a summer EBT application. We've continued to issue benefits since that point to students who are newly found eligible, whether from newly meeting the criteria for streamline certification or from recently submitting a summer EBT application. Thus far, we have issued approximately $53 million to over 440,000 eligible children. We believe there are close to 500,000 eligible children statewide, spanning more than 2,300 schools. As a final stat, as of last week, we believe that about 85% of the summer EBT benefits that we've issued this year have already been spent by Wisconsin families. Next slide. With my next slides, I'm going to give an overview of our approach to collecting and using data for the purposes of summer EBT in 2024. Next slide. So I'm first going to walk through the steps we took before any data was even collected. Our overarching approach in Wisconsin was to cast a very wide net, just as we'd done in our pandemic EBT implementation. What this meant was that we planned to collect data about eligible children from several different sources, hoping to maximize the number of kids who could be streamline certified. We arranged to pull administrative data sets from 3 different state agencies. We developed and maintained 2 family-driven platforms, the summer EBT application and the benefit management tool. Our benefit management tool was developed to give families a way to either opt out from receiving summer EBT or to provide updated contact information to the state to facilitate and expedite their benefit issuance. We also leveraged a platform that we originally built for pandemic EBT in order to collect student information directly from certain school districts. As I said, we knew that our net was far-reaching, meaning that many of these data sources would presumably overlap. As such, in advance of actually receiving any data, we talked through specific hierarchies that would help us decide which sources should be prioritized over others if, say, we received conflicting information about a student from more than one source. Finally, we tweaked and improved our pandemic EBT deduplication logic. This logic was designed to help us understand if, for example, Joe Smith, age 6, received from DHS is the same Joe Smith, age 6, received from DPI. Next slide. When we pulled in our net, our first step was to conduct some systematic deduplication of the student records we received. While this systematic effort eliminated many of the duplicates, there were inevitably instances where the logic we'd put in place could not confidently determine whether two records were representative of the same student. Our contracted summer EBT staff then stepped in to manually investigate each of these potential duplicates. Once this was complete and we had what we believed to be an unduplicated data set of eligible children, we set out to match as many of them as possible to existing benefit cases. For any eligible complete student record that could not be matched to an existing case, we would create a new case for them in our system. And the next step was actually issuing benefits. Here in Wisconsin, we issue to the head of the household, not to the child themselves. And whenever possible, we issued onto that person's existing EBT card. When no active EBT card existed, we would mail them a new EBT card with their summer EBT benefits loaded onto it. And finally, for any children we knew to be eligible, but for whom we did not have complete information, meaning, for example, we might have been missing a mailing address for the household, we placed them in what we called a queue. Families were instructed to contact our team if they believed their child was eligible for benefits but hadn't yet received them. That way they could provide any missing data elements, and once that information got added to their case, our team was able to release the family's benefits. At this point in time, we have about 55,000 children who are in this queue. Next slide. So real quick, I wanted to touch upon the actual execution of some of these data processes. All said and done, here is a visual showing the breakdown of the administrative data sources and where the student records we used for our June 22nd issuance came from. As you'll see, the vast majority of eligible student records for our big June issuance could be matched to an existing case within DHS or SNAP agency. Of those that could not be matched, they were provided from a mix of data from the other three administrative data sources. Next slide. So next, I'm going to review how our 2024 approach to handling SEBT applications worked, as well as run through our plan for 2025. Next slide. So to prepare for summer EBT in 2024, we made enhancements to an online application that we had created back in our PEBT years. This summer EBT application went live in April, and we continued collecting applications until August 29th, the end of our summer period. In total, more than 6,000 Wisconsin children were submitted via summer EBT application this year. In 2024, DHS oversaw the application platform and took leadership over this review process. That high-level process from start to finish follows the steps on this slide. It would start with a family submitting an application. DHS would then check to make sure the children listed in the application had not already received benefits for this year or were not already known to be eligible. If not, our contracted team would check to make sure that the application was filled out completely and that their stated income was at or below the necessary threshold for their household size. If so, about once per week, our team would compile a file of these income eligible children and pass it on to our counterparts at DPI. DPI would then work to verify that each of those children did, in fact, attend a National School Lunch Program school and have access to meals there during the 2023-2024 school year. Once this was confirmed, DPI would mark each child on the file as approved or not, and pass that file back to us at DHS. To make sure we kept within the 15-day federally required window for application turnaround time, this step would also happen about once per week. DHS would then be tasked with marking applications as approved or denied, sending out notices to households, and issuing the benefits when applicable. Next slide. For 2025, Wisconsin will be using the Nutralink application platform for the first time, rather than the version we created during PEBT and then enhanced. This means that the primary difference a household will experience is that the Summer EBT application itself will look slightly different. That said, next year, there will be some pretty significant behind-the-scenes changes in how this interagency process looks in Wisconsin. To start, DPI will be managing the application platform and taking the lead over both the review and verification processes next year. This means that when a family submits an application for the summer of 2025, it will go to DPI first, rather than to us at DHS. The Nutralink platform will initially conduct some automated review to confirm the completeness of each application, as well as to verify that the household attested to having an income at or below the necessary level. For any children that meet these initial criteria, DPI will then check that they were actually enrolled and receiving meals at an NSLP school. When that is confirmed, DPI will mark applications as approved and then pass a data set over to DHS with information about just these approved children. DHS will run checks to ensure that the children on that file have not already been issued benefits, and if not, we will send that household a notice in the mail and issue them their summer EBT dollars. As is hopefully clear, a main goal with these changes from 2024 to 2025 is to make this process run more efficiently and eliminate much of the back and forth data sharing that we relied on for this summer. As a final note for next year, DPI will be conducting rolling verification of applications as they come in to ensure that we as a state stay compliant with the federal requirement that 3% of applications be subjected to additional verification steps. Next slide. Okay, I'd briefly like to touch upon some of the main areas that I think really helped us in Wisconsin successfully get through this first round of Summer EBT implementation. Next slide. So to start, our benefit management tool that I mentioned was a unique self-service type of way for families to opt out of Summer EBT or to provide the state with contact information for their household. This tool undoubtedly prevented many phone calls to our staff team and also likely led to many families being able to receive their benefits to the right location the first time around. Second, our contracted Summer EBT staff team are total rock stars. Without them, we could not have stood up this program, plain and simple. They are responsible for so many areas, including but not limited to reviewing and keeping track of all those applications I just spoke about, as well as responding to all the calls and emails we get from families. Finally, the fact that we were able to build off of so much that we had constructed during our PEBT implementation years meant that we were almost never starting from square one. Listed here, you'll see all the various portals and platforms that we originally created during the pandemic, which we were able to enhance now for Summer EBT purposes. This saved us both time and money, both of which we all know were in short supply. While there were, of course, other keys to our success, these three stood out to me as extra critical and perhaps somewhat unique from what other states may have experienced. Next slide. So before I wrap up, I want to touch on a few key challenges and how we in Wisconsin have been working to overcome them. First, this year, we ran into hurdles in systematically identifying eligible children who attended National School Lunch Program schools but were under our state's typical compulsory age. Currently, NSLP schools in Wisconsin have not been required or even had a way to share with us whether those young children are given meals each day or not. For example, some students who attend half-day kindergarten in the afternoons may arrive to their NSLP site after lunch is served, whereas those who attend in the morning half of the day might be given breakfast or lunch. This posed a problem for us as we needed to know not just which children attended NSLP schools, but which children received free or reduced price meals at those schools. When this gap in available data became clear earlier this spring, we quickly threw together a short survey that we sent to representatives at NSLP schools that served these younger children and asked them to provide more clarity on which of them did and did not have access to meals. This worked, but even better for next year, we are working with our partners at DPI to change what elements of data NSLP schools must report to the state so that this access to meals piece is included and can be used to more easily identify our youngest eligible children. Next slide. A major new challenge that we anticipate for 2025 is that we expect significant increases in the number of summer EBT applications that get submitted. So to explain, in 2024, many children who attended schools where everyone is given free meals, regardless of income, did not also need to apply directly for summer EBT in order for benefits to be issued. We were able to access data about just the economically disadvantaged children at these schools behind the scenes and issue summer EBT benefits just to them without additional action needed from families. The population of children who attend schools where everyone is given free meals like this is very large in Wisconsin, so this was a big win not only for families but also for our staff team in that it drastically tamped down the number of incoming summer EBT applications. In 2025, the federal rules are changing, and Wisconsin will no longer be able to automatically identify summer EBT eligible children at these types of schools in the same way we did in 2024. As such, we expect that many of these families whose children attend schools where everyone is given free meals will turn to the summer EBT application to establish their eligibility for next year. There are several ways that we are proactively working to mitigate the effects of this influx. First, our new NutriLink application will include some additional questions at the beginning to try to weed out unnecessary applications from families whose children are already slated to receive benefits automatically. Second, for applications that do get submitted, NutriLink will be capable of conducting some of the initial verification steps automatically that this year our team had to manually review. We will create targeted communications for schools and families to help them understand the nuances of summer EBT eligibility and who really does need to complete a summer EBT application. And finally, because the program won't be brand new, we do expect that some families will go into next year with a better baseline understanding of what they need to do. Together, we believe these proactive steps will help us handle the anticipated increase in applications received. Next slide. I think that's all I have. Thank you for letting me come share our Wisconsin summer EBT journey.
Thank you so much, Jess, and thank you to all of our panelists. We do have just a few minutes here, and so if you want to put your questions in the Q&A function, any questions that we don't get to, we will try to respond to via email or in our follow-up. I'm going to stick my email in the chat, so if anybody would like to follow up with a question, I will be more than happy to try to get it along to our panelists and get you an answer. So I think we'll start with a question for any of our panelists. So when looking at summer EBT back in 2022, did any of your states struggle with the administrative costs? And were there adjustments you made in implementation to lower costs or ways that along the way you have found could help to limit costs?
Yes, I can jump in. Funding is definitely a constant struggle for us here in Wisconsin. I know I mentioned that biennial state budget cycle, which unfortunately just didn't happen to line up quite right for summer EBT by the time we had learned about the program and learned what was really needed. So we definitely had to make adjustments along the way to all of these different portals and platforms that I mentioned, you know, instead of making them quite as tech savvy or advanced, you know, we made adjustments to simplify them along the way to save costs. We also really wish that we could have been more proactive with some of our communication to households that we knew would be eligible for summer EBT by maybe sending them a letter or text messages or other things that, you know, would have really clarified for them that they were eligible and didn't need to take any action. But all of those things unfortunately cost quite a bit of money, at least in a state of our size. So we definitely had to make cuts along the way while still trying to be in compliant with all of the requirements.
I can agree with some of that from the Colorado side as well. I think one of the things that was helpful for us in trying to keep costs down was I had mentioned that we got that procurement exemption for the very first year of setting up this program. That enabled us to just kind of jump right in to contracting with some of our existing vendors under favorable pricing and things like that to really utilize good procurements and good pricing to kind of bring some of that down. And additionally, like we have our call center where we can scale up and down the services. So as we knew people would start calling in more, we scaled the services up. And now that we're starting to get towards the end of that, in the next couple of months here, we'll scale the services back down. So it's also trying to create frameworks in there where we can try to stretch the budget a little bit while still remaining responsive to families. And that's some of the stuff that we've tried to do from the contracting side.
Wonderful. So we are at 4 o'clock and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So any questions we did not get to, I will share with our panelists in our response email to everyone, our follow-up email, we will include an answer to any questions that are outstanding. So thank you all so much. Thank you to our amazing panelists. This has been a wonderful webinar and we very much appreciate having you all here to speak on this amazing program. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.